Hello, am I audible? Okay, I hope I'm audible. Uh, Welcome to the seventh tutorial of forests and their management. So we've reached the seventh week, and as you already know, I'm Geetika Agarwal. I'm from the Center for Ecological Sciences, and I'll be giving a brief summary of whatever was discussed during this week, and then we'll have a short quiz. So this week was all about how should we go about, or how do we go about in general, or how does the department go about maintaining the forests of the country. So there are silvicultural systems in place, and we discussed about one of these systems called the clear felling system, and then there was a discussion about regeneration, or how is regeneration of forest crop brought about, and what are the different practices that the forest department does in order to regenerate a place which where the forest has been destroyed. Okay, so what is a forest stand? So first we'll start by discussing what exactly is a forest stand. So can you guys tell me what's a forest stand? You can unmute yourself and take a guess on what is what does a forest stand mean? Okay, if not, a forest stand is basically just a continuous community of trees which is sufficiently uniform in composition. So, in that community of trees, the composition should be more or less uniform throughout that particular area, and the structure should be is uniform. Age and size class distribution is more or less uniform throughout the area, and you are able to distinguish this particular patch from another patch. So, this particular stand of forest, there should be a way that you can distinguish it from the nearby communities based on either the composition or structure, age, size, class distribution, on how the trees are arranged, what is the spatial arrangement of trees, what is the quality of the site, and what is the condition of the trees in that particular, or the vegetation in general in that particular area. So, for example, you could have an area in which you mostly have, say, jamun trees, and with it, say, you maybe have mango trees. So, you have a mix of jamun and mango trees in one particular stand. But in an area adjacent to it, you mostly have, say, jackfruit trees. So, you will be able to distinguish these two areas based on the composition. That, okay, this particular area just has mango and jamun, and that particular area only has jackfruit trees. So that's one way of distinguishing based on the composition. Another is maybe looking at the age class structure. So, for example, there's one area that just has young trees, and there's another area that only has like just seedlings. So you'll very well be able to distinguish these two. So this is what is basically a forest stand. So if you're able to make out that, okay, this particular patch is different from that patch and they're not like the same, then that's basically called a forest stand. And what is the age structure? So as you can already take a guess, age structure is basically where we discuss like what is the age of the trees in that particular forest stand, and how is that age distributed among the individuals that are present in that forest. Individuals, I mean the plant individuals. And to take even a simple guess, the age structure is basically, they could be even, it could be uneven, or it could be, for example, two aged. So even basically means more or less the trees have similar ages and there are very small differences. For example, say it's less than 20% of the rotation age. We'll discuss in the later slide what basically is the rotation age. But yeah, more or less within 20%. So if say the rotation age is 100 years, so the in the even age forest, the trees will vary from 80 to 120 years of age in that particular forest. If it's an uneven aged, then the trees have differences which are more than this 20% of the intended rotation. And if it's a two aged forest, then basically there's a bimodal distribution of ages. So basically, it will either have, say, a younger generation of just 50 years and one which is like, say, half of the trees are around 50 years of age and the other half are around 100 years of age. So you will have two distinct ages in the ages of trees in that particular stand. So this, for example, is an even aged forest where more or less all the trees are mature. And this is an uneven aged forest in which some of the trees are mature, some of them are young. And this is what an even aged age distribution looks like. If the x-axis is age and y-axis is the number of trees, then this is what an even aged forest would look like, because more or less all the trees are in this particular distribution. Say this is 50 years, so more or less all the trees are around 50 years of age. There are some which are like 60 and some which are 40, but more or less they fall within this distribution. These bimodal distributions are the ones which give you an idea of two-aged forest structure. In this, you can say assume that trees are 25 years of age. Half the trees are 25 years, and half the trees are nearby 75 years of age. So yeah, that's basically two-aged. And uneven aged will have all the age classes. So it'll have a higher variety of age classes in that particular forest stand, right? So it depends on what you want to do with your forest, which kind of age structure you would want to maintain. If you're trying to maintain your forest, for example, for timber harvesting purposes, you would want to have an even aged forest. If you're trying to maintain it for biodiversity or for like increasing the number of animals, birds, and plants, anything that you find in that forest, then you would, I think, more or less want to have an uneven aged forest. A two-aged forest will be helpful if you want to harvest only some part of the forest and not the entire at the same time. If you don't want to like completely barren the area and then start again, then you can a two-aged forest can be helpful, because then you can only cut down the mature trees and keep the younger ones, and then when the younger ones mature, then you can cut them down, and by then you could have planted a new crop in that particular area. Moving on to what could be the strand structural objectives. So, if you're moving in with silviculture and different silvicultural systems, then there are certain strand structural objectives. Like what objectives are you do you have in mind for your forest stand? So, what do you want your forest stand to look like? And these could be based on different characters of the forest. It could be about the age class structure. As we discussed, you might want to maintain a certain age class in your forest. So you can have, like as we just discussed, even, uneven, or two-aged, or more than that, basically. So what is in your mind? What do you want to do with your forest? So that would be your objective. It could be based on site occupancy, which means that how well are the trees occupying the site, and what is the density of trees in the area, how much area is one tree occupying. All of that comes under site occupancy. What is the mixture of species found in your stand of forest? So if your forest stand, say, has two species, has multiple types of species, or you want a monoculture, you only want one particular species because you're entirely maintaining that forest for timber purposes, then that could be your particular objective towards the forest stand. It could be about the spatial distribution of trees, which is slightly different from site occupancy. Here we're talking about whether the trees, how are they distributed. If you have a stand, is like all the trees uniformly distributed, like they are, particularly maybe you have planted them in rows and columns, so you have a proper matrix of trees in that area, a uniform distribution? Or are the trees clumped? Say in one particular zone you have more trees in one clump and another clump has trees and the other is grassland area or something like that. So that's basically what kind of a spatial distribution you would want to maintain in your forest stand. And then maybe you want to have certain desirable attributes, structural attributes in your forest. For example, if you want to have snag trees, which, as we discussed in one of these earlier tutorials, a snag tree is basically an old tree which you just leave. Maybe it's a dead tree, but you just leave it in the forest, you don't destroy it, because it is used by a lot of birds, it's used by a lot of insects. So maybe you want to help the biodiversity of the area, then that particular snag tree will come in handy, because a lot of forest birds use it for nesting. A lot of insects feed on the bark of these dead trees, and birds in turn feed on the insects. So a lot of these things happen. So maybe you want to have these certain features in your forest. So maybe you want to maintain the stand like that. So you could have different structural objectives for your stand in mind. And these are the different categories in which they can be classified. Then we just discussed rotation age when we were talking about the age structure of the forest, and we were saying that in an even forest, the difference between the ages is less than 20% of the rotation age, and in an uneven forest, it's more than 20%. So now we'll discuss what exactly is the rotation age. It's basically the number of years between the formation and the final felling of the crop. So when did you plant the crop, or when were the trees planted versus when they are being felled? So it's more or less the average age at which you call that the tree is mature enough for felling. So if you're using a tree for timber purposes, so for example, at 50 years, the tree reaches its maximum height and maximum width, and after that, it's only gonna like it's gonna stay the same more or less size wise, but it's just gonna age. Otherwise, maybe it's going to shed its leaves and all of that. Then 50 years or somewhere around 55 will be considered its rotation age, because after that you can harvest that tree and sell the timber, and you will still get the same amount of returns as you would get, for example, if you harvest a 60-year or a 70-year-old tree. So that's basically the average age at which a tree is called mature for felling. So it's okay enough to fell that tree at that particular age and harvest the timber. So that's about rotation age. Next is, what is silviculture? So this we discussed in the first tutorial, the very first class of this course. So can anybody tell me what is silviculture? So we've come across this term multiple amount of times by now that you all would be aware of what is silviculture. So would anybody like to take a guess? You can either type it out in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and tell the answer. What do you think is silviculture? Nobody? Okay, if nobody wants to take, I guess. As we've discussed multiple times earlier, silviculture is basically the art and science of growing trees. And a system, if, as you all might know, a system basically, or you call something a system when there's a particular set of practices which basically are interconnected in a particular workflow. So you do A and then B and then C, there are certain practices, and you follow those in a particular order, and that's basically called a system. And what is a silvicultural system? It's basically a system that you follow to grow trees. So it's a planned program of treatments which you use during the whole lifespan of a forest, which is basically designed to achieve your specific stand structural objectives. So we discussed the stand structural objectives. You can have objectives about the age structure of your forest, about the species composition, about the distribution of trees, about certain having certain attributes in your forest. So all of these structural objectives, so they can be achieved by having a certain silvicultural system, and it is a planned program of treatments which you can use throughout the lifespan of your forest. So a silvicultural system has these three different processes, or three different z- what do you call it? Yeah, three different processes. Basically, one of them is harvesting, where you are felling a mature forest. So you have a mature forest and you're basically clearing all the pre-existing forest crop, either mostly for harvesting the economical portion of your forest. Basically, you might have a lot of timber producing vegetation, or you might have a lot of forest produce, like non timber forest produce, and you're clearing the forest to get all of these economical returns from it. And then the next step would be renewal of the forest crop, which is called regeneration. So you carry out certain regeneration techniques in order to renew the forest crop in that area which you've already harvested. And then the last one would be tending to the crop. So whatever crop you have regenerated or just renewed in that area, then you have to take care of the standing crop. So that's called tending. So that's basically silvicultural system. Harvesting, if you want to go into the definition of it, it's basically the sum of all of the operations from pre-harvest planning to post-harvest inspection, which are related to felling of the trees and extraction of the resources. So all of the operations that come Pre-harvesting planning is basically before you are harvesting the forest, you would have certain plan in mind, like how do I want to harvest this forest? Do I want to entirely fell all of the trees? Do I want to entirely take out all of the plants in that area and start afresh? Or do I want to divide my forest into certain zones and then, harvest one at a time? Or do you want to maybe selectively harvest the forest and not basically clear the entire crop? So that would be a pre harvesting planning. And post harvest inspection would be when you go in after having harvested the area, you go in and see how the forest looks now. If you have done some selective harvesting, then you can look at what crop is left behind and how it's gonna renew itself in that area. And if you have carried out a clear felling, you have entirely cleared out the area, then you can look at, okay, now what is how does the soil look like, what are the nutrients present in the soil, what can I do to renew the crop and start the forest afresh. So basically that comes all of this comes under harvesting. And anything which is related to felling of the trees, and then extraction of resources. Okay, another things that will come under extraction of resources is basically where am I going to get all of the trucks that are going to carry the resources from the forest towards the city or towards the industry, wherever you're selling your produce, where you're going to get the labor to harvest the forest, where you're going to get all the machines to harvest the forest. So all of that also comes under harvesting. Then there is regeneration, which is basically the act of renewing tree cover in that area. And this you can either do naturally or artificially. We'll be discussing this in further detail in a little bit. So basically, uh, all the all the all the process that goes into renewing the tree cover in this area, which you've just cleared out, by trying to either artificially or naturally trying to establish young trees. So the area is empty now and you somehow want to establish new trees in this area. That's regeneration. And tending to it, tending, the term itself means taking care of something. It's basically for the benefit of the forest crop, can be carried out at any stage of the forest stand. So basically, for example, say your forest stand is suffering from a pest infestation, so at that stage you might be doing some pesticide spray in the forest zone. Or if the resources are going down, you might be providing supplementing the soil with fertilizers. Or if the water is going down, you might be adding more water, or irrigating your forest zone. So all of these things, so at any stage of the forest stand you could be carrying out this tending. Or you might be pruning the forest, basically if some of the plants have gotten too big and some of them are too small, so you might want to give the small ones also some area, so you might prune the bigger one. Or sometimes when you prune a tree is when more newer branches, newer leaves, fresher branches come out, which is helpful for the tree to grow bigger. Or you could be pruning out actually climbers. There could be climbers growing onto your tree which can uh, inhibit the growth of the tree properly, and then in turn will come in the way of your harvesting timber from that tree. So you might want to cut out the climber from which is trying to grow on the tree. So all of this comes under tending. So taking any sort of taking care of the forest. So could be pruning, could actually also be felling some of the trees so as to provide others proper space to grow. So if your forest stand has become too congested for all of the trees to grow properly, to then you will not be able to get timber properly from any of the trees. So it's better to fell some of them so that you can get good quality timber at least from the trees that are left behind, right? So all of this comes under trending. So there are these three big processes in a silvicultural system: harvesting, regeneration, and tending of the stand. Then there are certain objectives of the silvicultural system itself. One of them is basically producing predictable harvest returns over time. So, when you are looking after a particular forest stand and you're going with certain stand objectives, you also have certain objectives in mind based on which you choose your silvicultural practices. So, these objectives, while employing certain silvicultural systems, you keep in mind, or you want to be able to produce predictable harvests over time, that you want to predict ahead of time that how much timber will I get in return if I'm planting these many trees in this much area and I'm taking care of them in so and so ways. So you want to be able to predict what is going to be timber produce or non-timber harvest, whatever. You want to be able to predict that. You maybe want to balance the biological, economical, and ecological concerns. So you maybe want to plant economical trees as well, which will give you high returns, but you might want to mix it up with other species so that the biodiversity of the area is high and more number of birds and animals can be, sustained or can be um, accommodated in that area. So all of these things can be in mind. You might want to balance your biological and economical you might want to provide for regeneration. So while taking care of a crop, so yeah, while harvesting, you might want to keep in mind how are you going to regenerate the forest as well. So for example, while harvesting, you would want to keep in mind how are you going to get seeds for the next trees. Are you going to go with natural regeneration? Are you going to go with artificial regeneration? So basically, how are you going to be providing for regeneration in that particular area? Then you might want to efficiently utilize the space and improve the productivity. So that could be one of your silvicultural objectives, that okay, fine, I have this space in hand, but I want to effectively utilize the entire space so that I have the maximum amount of productivity from this area. And for example, with whatever resources and with whatever space I have, I want to maximize my returns from this area. Next is, you might want to sustain non-market values in ecosystem services. As we discussed, you might want to balance economical and ecological concerns. So again, one of your objectives could be entirely non economical, could be entirely that what is basically how is the environment going to be affected by this forest stand. So maybe you want to stabilize the soils. So maybe if your stand is next to a river, and so maybe you want to plant trees very close to the river edge so that none of the extra sediments get deposited in the river or get taken away by the river, so none of the soil at the river banks gets eroded. So maybe you want to put your attention towards that and put more and plant more trees at the river banks. So that could be one thing. You might want to maintain the native populations of insects and birds, fungi, microorganisms, any of these things. So you might want to maintain the biodiversity. You could be wanting to improve habitat for the biodiversity in the area. You could be wanting to improve the habitat of birds, animals, and these microorganisms, all of them. And or you might want to enhance water quality and retention in that area. So if you have a forest which is right next to a village, for example, so you might want to utilize that forest in such a way that during monsoons maximum amount of water gets absorbed in that area, and eventually slowly and steadily gets released into the river, or slowly gets into the water, or can get retained into the underground water and can be utilized by the villagers later. So that there's no there's no drought like conditions, or there's not any reduced water for the villagers living next to that particular forest stand. So these could be certain silvicultural objectives that you have in mind. One could be sequestration and storage of carbon. So now that we're living in a time where there's so much global warming, so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, your goal might be to sequester maximum amount of carbon. So that could be one of your objectives. And based on that objectives, you might want to plant certain particular species of trees which are able to sequester more and more carbon, which have more biomass. So all of this comes under consideration. Next is, why do we need different silvicultural systems? So why can't we just function with one particular silvicultural system and apply it to all the places, or to all of the forests that I have across India? Why can't I just use one particular silvicultural system? And that, as you might already be aware, is not possible because we have different. All of the stands are different in their characteristics. So if one particular area or one particular stand has more drought-like conditions, you can't use the same silvicultural systems in this area as you're using in a stand which is waterlogged, or which has more and more water in, or which is quite abundant in water. If there's one zone which is high fertility, and there's another zone which does not have a good amount of fertility, you can't use same silvicultural practices in both these areas. So because all the stands have different characteristics, you need to have different ways in which you deal with these stands, because you might have different objectives. So you would not apply the same practices to a forest which is entirely maintained for its timber produce versus a forest which is entirely maintained for its biodiversity. So you would have to apply different practices to both these areas because your objectives are different with those stands. And the last one is differences in how much manpower and technology is available in that particular area. So if you are somewhere too deep in the forest where you do not have enough manpower, and which is dense, so dense that you cannot get your big JCBs into that area, then the kind of silvicultural practices you utilize in that area will be very different from the ones that you will utilize in forests, which are, say, very close to villages or very close to towns and cities, right? So, this is why we need different silvicultural systems. Moving on to this, there's this flowchart in which there are different silvicultural systems which have been mentioned. So, which system you're going to use or what you're going to do depends on what is going on in this flowchart. So, first of all, you ask yourself, is the felling and regeneration either concentrated on one part of the forest or is continuous over the whole area? So, if it is concentrated on a particular part of the forest, then the next question is the old crop cleared in a single felling? Yeah, do you like entirely clear that area, or do you go forward with successive regeneration fellings? So you fell apart and then leave the next and then do the next one. So you have successive regeneration fellings. So if the crop is being cleared in one single felling, that's called a clear cutting system. So that particular technique or that particular silvicultural system is called a clear cutting system. If you go for successive regeneration fellings, then all of these come under shelter wood system. Now, what kind of a shelter wood system is it? Depends on how is the canopy being opened. So basically, you have a continuous canopy, and if you're going for successive regeneration fellings, so some part of the forest you will clear and some you will leave untouched. So, how is the canopy being opened based on how you're clearing the forest? Either you are evenly opening over one particular compartment, that's called a uniform system, or you are creating scattered gaps somewhere, you are felling the trees somewhere in a knot, which is very haphazard, then that's called a group system, or it's irregular and gradual, then that's called an irregular shelterwood system. So, this is basically terminology based on how you are felling your trees in that particular zone. Second could be if the felling of trees is not concentrated in one particular part of the forest and is happening over the entire area, then that's basically called selection system. So you might be going into the forest and you're basically selecting certain species of trees or certain tree individuals, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna fell this tree, this tree, this tree, this tree, and that's happening throughout the forest, but the entire forest is not getting destroyed. So that is called basically a selection system because you're selecting which trees to harvest. Okay, now, the next lecture was about discussing the clear felling system, or what is the clear felling system. As we just discussed, there are two characteristics in the clear felling system. So, can anybody tell me what are the two characteristics which we just discussed, which lead to the usage of clear felling system? I just told you in the previous slide when we were looking at the flow chart. One of the characteristics is about whether the harvesting or the felling of trees is happening in one particular zone or in the entire forest. And the second is about whether you are um, entirely clearing the area or you are taking it out gradually and in successive regeneration systems. So, yeah, can you guys tell me what is the two characteristics of clear felling system? I literally just gave away the answer. Okay. If no one wants to take a guess, basically, as I said, clear felling system is concentrated on one part of the forest, and the clearing is done in one single felling. So it's a kind of a harvesting system in which all the economical trees or the merchantable trees, basically the trees that can be sold or can be yeah, can be sold and you can get economic returns from that. All of those trees within a particular physical area, within a specified physical area of land, are harvested, they are felled, and there is no significant tree cover that remains after this harvesting has happened. So after you have carried out clear felling, so the entire area is now barren, there's nothing left behind. So that's called a clear felling system. but it only happens in a very concentrated area, in a very small area of the entire forest. Okay. What are the different characteristics as we discussed? So basically, you could be dividing your forest into different zones. So, for example, if you have a rotation age of n, then you would mostly want to divide your forest into 1 by n parts. So you would want to, sorry, if you would want to divide your forest into n parts. If your rotation age is 6, you would want to divide your forest into 6 parts. And then each of these forests will be harvested in one particular year. So, for example, they reach maturity at 6 years of age. So, at that point, you will harvest the first part, and then the in the next year, the next part will reach the maturity. It will become 6 years of age, and the previous one you would have planted. So, the previous one so in one year you basically work only in one particular zone. So you divided your forest into n parts based on the rotation age, and you only work on one particular forest area during 1 year. So you harvest the trees from that particular area, and then you carry out regeneration practices. So while this part is regenerating, you go to the next part, clear it, and you again plant the seeds. Then you go to the next part. By the time you're done with all the end parts and you return back to the first part, you will see that these trees will be mature now, and everything else will be like will it'll fall together in time. So basically that's why successive areas of mature crop are cleared successively. One by one you move along to the next area to clear the crop. Next is the regeneration. Mostly here is artificial, either by planting of seedlings or by spreading seeds manually, or uh, mm, by using machines. But regeneration is artificial. Can anybody tell me why is that? Why do we have to carry out artificial regeneration in a clear fell forest? Anybody would like to take a guess? It's a very logical answer. Like it's not like you can't reach the answer. So, but why do you think if you are clearing a particular patch of forest, you will have to carry out artificial regeneration? You'll have to either plant the seedlings yourself, or you would have to spread the seeds in that area yourself. Why is that so? Anybody who can tell me, or I will choose maybe some participant to give an answer. You can type out the answers in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and tell me the answer. Anyone? It's a very simple question. If you are doing clear felling in a particular area, why do you think you need to carry out artificial regeneration and you can't just leave the area itself to regenerate on its own? Can you think of one reason why is that so? We can all sit around, guys, with nobody answering or nobody interacting at all. Can any of you think of one reason why would you want to have to carry out artificial regeneration in an area which has undergone clear felling? Okay. Yeah, maybe that is something you guys can think about. Moving on to the characteristics, you can either do this regeneration by a departmental in a departmental way, basically where the forest department is carrying out the regeneration, or you can have a tonga regeneration where you take the help of the villagers, so the department is doing the regeneration with the villagers. Or if in some cases you can also allow natural vegetation or regeneration to happen if you rely on the soil as acting as a seed bank in the area. So if you think that the soil already will have seeds from the trees that you've just harvested, there will be some dormant seeds lying in the soil, then basically you can rely on the soil as a seed bank, and you can or you can rely on advanced growth or coppicing and root suckers. Coppicing is basically when you cut a tree and the bark is still left, like the root system and a little bit of the bark is still left. So from that, if you leave it alone, if you don't do anything to it, eventually fresh seedlings or fresh branches will start sprouting from that particular bark. And if you cut off all the branches and leave only one, that will again take up the entire tree. It will start developing and it will become an entire tree on top of this tree. And root suckers basically are when these saplings are coming out of the roots of the trees. So if you leave the uh, the base of the bark and the root system intact, basically some seedlings or some saplings will start coming out of the roots, basically a kind of a vegetative propagation where seeds are not coming in the way and the trees are propagating vegetatively. So those are the cases where you can use natural regeneration. A characteristic next is basically all vegetation is removed. As we just discussed, all of the vegetation needs to be cleared from that area. So, and a lot of space is then available for new plants to grow, which was earlier occupied by all the mature plants. That space is now available for new plants to grow in the area. And you'll get an even aged crop structure because you've destroyed all of the vegetation in the area and everything is starting from zero. So, you will get an even aged stand structure in this particular area. All right. Now, how can you deviate slightly from clear felling? If you don't want to like entirely clear the area, there are some deviations that can be practiced from clear felling. One of them is you could either prevent unnecessarily harvesting trees. You can like leave behind certain few trees which you think are promising, and you can leave them behind to be harvested later sometime. And these can serve as the seed banks for the next for the regeneration of the new crop. You could retain some mature trees as nurse crops. So nurse crops basically when you have a tree with its shadow, so a lot of shade tolerant plants can grow in the shadow of this tree, because not all plants are very good at growing in full sunlight conditions. So these trees which you leave behind, which you don't harvest, like in the clear felling you don't destroy all of the trees and you leave some mature trees behind, they can actually act as nurse crops, which help the or their shade or their nutrition helps the growth of new seedlings or new saplings in that area. You could be girdling unmarketable trees. So, for example, you have mature trees in your area, but they're not useful. You cannot sell them. Maybe there a species which is not used for timber or anything like that. Then you can just instead of felling this tree, because if you fell this tree, if you cut it down, then you have to carry it out of the forest. That's going to require a lot of infrastructure, a lot of manual labor, a lot of machinery. What you can do is simply girdle that tree. Girdling is basically a technique in which you clear out the vascular structure of the tree. So it leaves the tree in place, but it will die eventually because you have destroyed the vascular structure of the tree. So the xylem and phloem is destroyed, so it disrupts the flow of nutrition inside the tree. It will eventually die and become a snack tree. So instead of you having to cut it and take it out of the forest, you can just leave it behind, and it will also help the biodiversity of the area. Next is you can design the pattern of felling based on the local conditions. So where and all you're carrying out clear felling can be based on what are the local conditions of your stand. Is your stand you can either take it out in in progressive strips, so you clear one strip, then you go to the next strip and clear that strip. So you could do it in that way. You do not clear the entire stand, you clear it strip by strip, right? Or you could do alternate strips, that okay fine, if I divide the forest into 10 strips, I'll do 1 and 1 3 5 7 9 this time, and the next time I'll do 2 4 6 8 10. So like that you can either clear the alternate strips. Or if you're, say, the terrain is like a hilly area, and so you won't want to carry out clear felling in that terrain, because that will lead to a lot of soil erosion and a lot of silting of that area. If your area is near a dam, again clear felling is not suggested, because a lot of sediments will get eroded with the water flow, and they will if a dam is nearby, then silting will happen and the dam will get blocked. What are the different types of clear felling? There is standard or uniform clear felling, in which you basically clear the entire area and no canopy remains is left behind. Patchy, you carry out the clear felling in patches and you don't basically clear the entire area. So some canopy remains, some of it is gone. Strip, as we discussed, you basically clear it in strips, and most of the time what happens is you clear it in a way so that it's perpendicular to the prevailing winds, so that the wind does not destroy the rest of the stand. So if a wind is coming from this direction, you would want to clear this strip, so that still the same amount of wind impact is happening on the remaining trees. So you would want to clear out perpendicular to the prevailing winds, and you remove trees in a row. Clear cut with reserves. So you are felling all of the trees, but you're leaving behind certain trees as reserves. So you're still leaving behind certain few chosen trees as a reserve for future. Slash and burn, as you might already be aware, you basically fell or cut down the trees, and then you burn any of the you know remaining bark which is down, and the roots and all of that. You basically burn all of that. So that is slash and burn. So these are five different types of clear felling strategies. Then, where and all clear felling is suitable depends on different things, like whether or not there are light demanding species in that area. If the area has shade loving species and not light demanding species, then clear felling is not suitable for that area, because after you have felled all of the trees, there's going to be a lot of sunlight because there's no canopy cover left. What are the regeneration ability of the species? If the species are good at regenerating, then clear felling is useful in those areas. But if the species take a lot of time, or not very good at regenerating, that's clear felling is not going to help. What kind of a soil is present? What is the soil cover? What is the fertility? If the fertility of the soil is low, then again clear felling is not going to be useful. It is necessary, or clear felling is important if you want to change the species composition. For example, you have a mixed forest somewhere, but you want to convert it into a monoculture, then clear felling will be important. It's necessary. So you need to clear the entire forest and then start afresh with the monoculture in mind. Economic considerations: if you want to take down timber and you sell it off, then basically, yeah, clear felling is required. Locality considerations: what locality is it in, how people are using the forest, those and all. Or again, what is the terrain in which the landscape is present, if it's present on a hillock, if it's present near a dam. All those things you should keep in mind while before carrying out clear felling. What is the nature and the type of forest that you want to produce after clear felling? That is also important before you carry out clear felling. So if the nature of the forest, if you don't want to produce an even aged forest, then clear felling is not handy. If you entirely destroy the forest and start afresh, then it's going to be an even aged uniform forest. If you don't want that, if you want a forest with a high biodiversity for your plants, animals, birds, then you would want to stay away from clear felling. And how much machinery is available to you, how much manpower and how much machinery or how much technology is available to you. If you do not have enough large scale machines, then clear felling is going to be very difficult. So you can't carry out clear felling in those areas where mechanization is not handy. So advantages and disadvantages of clear felling. Here's a table of advantages and disadvantages. Clear felling mimics natural processes because it sort of acts like a forest fire, for example. It destroys all of the vegetation in that area in one go. So it mimics natural processes. It supports the pioneering species. So all the species that are good at regenerating in a destroyed area. Pioneer species, as you know, are the species which first inhabit a cleared area. So it supports these pioneering species. And any species that actually cannot compete in a mature forest, like if there's a mature forest and the species cannot establish itself, it can now do so because the mature forest is gone. If you want, if it's basically concentrated work, so you just have to work that one particular patch of forest and you don't have to go throughout the forest to carry out clear felling. So it's helpful because you have to just concentrate all of your forces in that particular zone. you end up with uniform crop. Most of your trees are going to have a nice cylindrical bowl for timber purposes, and you can have good quality timber if you are carrying out clear felling, because mostly it's even aged, and all of the trees are because it's even aged means the canopy height is similar for all of the trees, and all of them are trying to grow taller and taller to get more sunlight, and in the process of getting taller, they don't branch out early, and so they have mostly cylindrical bowls which can be used. You can control insects and diseases because you're entirely clearing the zone. Even if there was some insect damage or there was some diseases in the plant area, in the plants in the area, now because you've destroyed all of the plants, you've cut all of the plants, you can start afresh, and there will no longer be the same diseases or the insects. It's suitable for light demanding species. If it's bad for shade tolerant species, it's suitable for light demanding species, and you have better control, and you can modify the site however you want. So these are some advantages. Similarly, there are disadvantages also with clear felling. Regeneration is not ensured. So it's not important that you will always be able to regenerate that area which you've just cleared of all vegetation. And that's called a forester's folly, a forester's mistake. If they have cleared an area which they didn't think through properly, will be able to regenerate or not. It's not suitable for areas which are prone to frost, because there the young plants are not able to grow properly. It increases the chances of erosion and silt deposition, as I already discussed, because you've cleared all the vegetation. There is no because you've cleared all the vegetation, there is no trees supporting the soil in the area, so it's very easy for say wind and water to erode the soil as they flow from the area. It can have the conditions for the young crop are adverse now, so the young crop does not have like proper soil, because the soil is being exposed to sun, being exposed to wind. So all of these things are happening with the soil, becomes harsher, and because there's so much strong sunlight, the conditions for young crop is at worst. Wildlife in the area gets entirely destroyed because all of the trees are cut down, so all of the wildlife which was inhabiting that area needs to move away. So it's destruction of habitat. Cannot be used for shade loving species, we just discussed that, and it can increase the chances of flooding again, because there's nothing to stop the flow of water. Earlier, there were trees which can absorb the water, can keep a lot of water stored in the soil near their root systems. Now that is not happening, so flooding can happen even with like adequate amount of rainfalls, and not like excess rainfall. Even with a moderate amount of rainfall, flooding can happen in that area. Now, we have been discussing about regeneration. Now that clear felling has happened in the area, you need to regenerate your forest, right? So, after having harvested the timber from the area, you require regeneration. What is regeneration? We just discussed. It's basically the act of renewing tree cover. It can either happen naturally or artificially, and it should be mostly carried out promptly after the previous stand has been removed. So, as soon as the previous stand has been removed, you should be carrying out regeneration practices. Why is that? Is because if you leave it fallow for a long time, the soil can get eroded. We just discussed that because of the exposure to sunlight. A lot of the soil characteristics can get spoiled because of the chemical reactions. There could be a lot of acid rain in the area. A lot of leaching of nutrients will happen when water flows in that area, because there's no trees holding these resources together or these nutrients in place. So all of that can happen, which can destroy the quality of sand in the soil in the area. That's why it should be promptly carried out after the previous trees are removed. There are three ways in which you can regenerate forests. One of them is called natural regeneration, one is assisted natural regeneration, and one of the last one is the artificial regeneration. Natural regeneration, as the term suggests, it's basically when you allow the forest stand to re-establish on its own by natural means, and you don't really interfere with the forest. So you have cut down the trees, very good, but you don't like burn the this leftover bark, and you just leave the area for the regeneration. You leave it alone so that it can regenerate on its own. You don't do any further disturbance to the area. So this will happen either by natural seeding. So because maybe you left certain trees behind, if it was not entirely cleared, if there was no clear felling, but there was one of these deviations in which you leave certain nurse crops behind, or you leave certain mature trees behind, they can act as seed banks, and they can provide seeds in the next fruiting season, and these can then sprout in the area. They will get dispersed and they can then sprout in the area and become new trees. Or as you can see here, from the leftover bark and from the leftover roots, there can be a root sucker growing, or there can be a coppice which is growing. So these kind of propagations are called vegetative propagations. So either you can leave it for this, or you can leave it for the natural seed banks. Basically, trees and the soil also can have certain dormant seeds which will grow on their own after a point. Then there are certain characteristics of natural regeneration. One of them is basically it relies on older trees, the mature trees present in the area, which are also called seed or mother trees. And it can be employed only if the site is not fully harvested. If the site is entirely destroyed, all of the tree cover is taken away, then natural regeneration does not really come in handy. It can only be used if the site is not completely destroyed. I mean, all the trees are not harvested. Steps for natural regeneration: first of all, you will have to select seed trees, which should be not too young and not too old. If they are too young, they will not be properly producing a lot of, like, a high number of seeds. If they're too old, then again, still they will not be producing a high number of seeds. Only at a very good, fertile, mature age will the trees be able to produce a good number of seeds. So you'll have to select these seed trees and leave them behind. You will not harvest these trees. Then yeah, that's the second step. Basically, you log the area without damaging the seed trees, and then you leave the area alone for natural regeneration. And natural regeneration depends on different things. One of them, first thing, is seed production. So seed production, basically, because you're letting the forest stand regenerate on its own, it's very important how the seed is getting produced in the area. So first factor that it depends on is seed production. Number one is seed year. So seed year basically is a thing where after every 3-4 years, the trees can produce a large number of viable seeds. So it depends on seasonality and all of these climatic conditions. So basically, uh, say in one year, there will be a sudden boom in the number of seeds that are produced by the trees. Then it will go down again for a few years, and then again after 3-4 years, there will be another boom in the number of seeds being produced, which are viable also. So you can wait for seed year, and you can basically harvest your crop just before seed year. So that in the seed year, the mature trees that you leave behind can produce a high number of seeds, and then there are higher chances of your forest getting regenerated. What is the age of the tree? So if, as we said, it should be not too young, not too old. If it's a good mature tree, it can give more seeds. What is the size of the crown? If the crown is too small, then again, the branching will be less. If the branching is less, the fruiting is less. If the fruiting is less, then the seeds are less. So if a tree has a bigger crown, there's more branching, there is more flowers, more fruits, and more seeds that are produced by that particular tree. What is the climate? Of course, seeds getting sprouted depends on the climate. External factors like diseases, pests, or fire. If there's fire, then these trees will also get destroyed. Even the seeds in the soil will get destroyed. All of these things. Pest infestation will affect the things. Dispersal of seed is the next point. Okay, diseases will affect. So if the seeds get diseased, then again they will not be able to sprout properly. Next factor is seed dispersal. Seed dispersal can, if the seeds are being dispersed by water and wind, then that is better for natural regeneration, because then they depend on natural things like water and wind and not really on things like birds and animals. If the seed dispersal depends on birds and animals, then you might need to leave behind more trees, because if you harvest the entire area with just a few trees behind, it will not be able to support a higher number of birds and animals which can disperse the seeds. But if it's, say, a fruiting fig tree, a huge fig tree, then a lot of birds will visit this area. A lot of animals like macaques or deers will visit this area to feed on the berries of this tree. And when they move across the landscape, they'll be able to spread the seeds with their droppings, and that it will help the natural regeneration. Germination. Germination of the seeds will depend on what is the amount of moisture, temperature, what is the viability of the seeds, how permeable is the seed coat, whether the seed coat is thick, and then it will prevent the seed from germinating properly. If it's a permeable seed coat, the seed can germinate more sooner. Then last stage is establishment. Establishment is basically when a new crop is developed to a stage where the regeneration is considered safe. So when a seedling is too small, it can still be preyed upon or eaten by herbivores. So that's not considered a safe age. It still can be destroyed. If it's in the seedling stage, then also it can be fed upon by birds, can be fed upon by squirrels, for example. Again, not considered safe. But if the tree has reached a certain age, it's established, means Now it cannot be destroyed by herbivore action or by, say, insect action. That is when it's considered safe from the normal adverse effects like weeds. For example, yeah, if it's a young sapling, if there are weeds around, the weeds will take up all the nutrition, will compete with the sapling, and will not allow it to grow. So again, all of these things can affect the establishment of your young plants. So when the young plant is properly established, it's considered safe from these influences of frost, drought, weeds, or herbivore action, right? Again, there are certain advantages and disadvantages associated with natural regeneration. Advantages are like it's a low cost method because you're leaving the forest alone, you're not doing anything. There's no requirement of machinery and labor. It gives you a natural aesthetic look. It is only the ecologically suited species will grow here, so you will not have like a you will not have like a, what do you call it, a mismatch between the species that you're growing and the species that the area can support. Only those species will grow which are ecologically suited for the area. And you can preserve the locally adapted populations of plants and animals. And the microsite is a good place to preserve the genetic variability of that particular area. Some disadvantages is that the seed crop should be available. First of all, there should be a way to get the seeds, so you need to leave behind certain trees. If the soil is dry, it can lead to a lot of mortality because the seeds will not be able to germinate in the first go. Insects and seed feeders can consume a lot of these seeds, and then again, the regeneration will be hampered. Competition from other vegetation like weeds and all basically can again hamper the seedlings or saplings getting established. You don't have a lot of control over the stand spacing or density. Like it can become like a clumped forest, a clumped stand, which you might not want. You might have wanted it to be uniformly distributed trees. So you don't have control over all of these things. You don't have control over what is the genetics. So you might want to plant trees which are better adapted towards, say, drought conditions or towards insect infestations, but you can't do that with natural regeneration. And it takes more time because you're leaving it up to nature. You're not doing it fatafat by using machines and all of these things. So it takes more time. Then there is something called assisted natural regeneration. As the term suggests, it's basically a method in which you are trying to enhance the establishment of secondary forest from degraded grasslands and shrub vegetation by protecting and nurturing the mother trees and their wildlings inherently present in the area. So natural vegetation is happening. You still have mother trees and you have their saplings. They're already present in the area, but you are carrying out certain practices which help the establishment of the secondary forest. So already the primary forest was destroyed by clear felling, and maybe some mother trees were left behind. And now these mother trees, because of seed dispersal and all of that, maybe they've given rise to certain saplings. In ANR, you're just trying to help the establishment of this secondary forest from the degraded grassland and shrub vegetation, right? So that is ANR. What are the different methods here? Basically, assistance to the natural vegetation or natural regeneration is provided by either removing or reducing the barriers to the regeneration. So, as I said, there are certain barriers to sapling getting regenerated in the area. For example, there's a lot of weeds around, so the sapling will not be able to establish because of the competition in that area. So, in a way, you're trying to assist the regeneration of the target trees. So if the soil is degraded, you might want to add fertilizers in that area, which will help the soil, or you might want to say irrigate the area if the water is low. If there is competition with meat species, so these are basically the barriers. So you somehow want to overcome the degradation of the soil. You want to overcome the competition with weed species. You want to overcome other disturbances, for example, grazing, harvesting, fire, and maybe unsuitable climate. So for competition, you might want to clear the area which is right near the sapling. For example, you have a sapling here, so you might want to clear the area in a circle around the sapling itself. Not like you want to clear the entire area. You just want to clear the weeds from this particular area near the sapling. So that's a way in which you could overcome the competition with weed species. For grazing and fire and all, you can maybe take care that no fire happens in the area by creating fire lines around. You can prevent people from, you can demarcate this area that, okay, this is no grazing zone and people can't bring their cattle in this area. And again, you can mark it off as no harvesting area. And if the microclimate is unsuitable, maybe again, if the microclimate is unsuitable, maybe you can add more water, you can add fertilizers, all of these things. That'll make it better. So you maybe want to enrich, or you could actually even enrich the planting as and when required. So you might want to like add a little bit more seeds or things here and there to assist the natural regeneration. So you can mark the woody regeneration where and all the, so you can look at where and all the natural saplings are coming up. So you have mother trees, they have given out seeds, the seeds are regenerating, so you can mark off where and all these seeds are regenerating, where is the woody regeneration happening. Then you can liberate this saplings by removing the nearby vegetation. So if there is a sapling and there's a lot of vegetation around it, as I said, there'll be competition. So you can liberate the woody regeneration by removing the nearby vegetation. Then you can suppress weed growth by either ring weeding. Ring weeding is basically you carry out weeding or like removal of weeds in a ring around the sapling, which is of interest. Or you can suppress the weed growth by using like a board. So you have like a wooden board and you press it over the grass which is going around, the weed that is growing around, and that will suppress the growth of this grass around the sapling of interest. You can protect from disturbance. As I said, you can demarcate the area as a no grazing zone. You can maintain and enrich the sampling, the planting. Again, this has its own advantages and disadvantages. Advantages is, again, it is a low cost method because you're still not using a lot of machinery and a lot of manual labor. Only some people maybe which are helping with the weeding and all of these processes. It's simple. The growth will be a little accelerated compared to natural regeneration in which you just leave the land on its own, and it creates job opportunities for the local community. For example, there are villagers living around, or there are some tribes living near the area. It will help provide them with certain job opportunities. Some disadvantages is, again, you don't have a lot of control over how the trees are growing in the area. You will need skilled labor and you will need to train them. You will need to train the workforce into how to carry out this ring weeding, how to, suppress the growth of weeds around. You need to actually train them what are the woody trees and what are the weeds, first of all. What if they, by mistake, clear out the sapling itself? So you need skilled labor, you need to train them with all of these things. And the timing in which your sapling is regenerated usually clashes with the agricultural timing when they need to tend to their fields as well. So it can reduce the participation of villagers from around. Some problems with assisted natural regeneration. Then the last one is the artificial regeneration. As the term suggests, basically here you are renewing the forest by manually or by using machines, and you are sowing the seeds yourself and or planting the saplings yourself. So the sowing and the planting is happening by proper human intervention into the area. So you don't just allow the seeds to naturally come from other trees. You go out and you sow the seeds yourself, or you plant the saplings yourself, and or maybe use other artificial methods. That's how artificial regeneration is carried out. It can help with reforestation and afforestation. So afforestation cannot be carried out by natural regeneration. Why is that? Because afforestation means that you're trying to develop a forest in an area which has been fallow for a long time. There has been no forest in that area. There is no existing vegetation. So if there's no existing vegetation in that area for a long time, there cannot be any natural regeneration in that area. So artificial regeneration can help with that, and it can help with reforestation. Reforestation is basically if you've just cleared an area, as we discussed, you've just cleared one particular land of all the trees, you've harvested all the trees, and you want to restock this cleared woodland, then that is called reforestation, and that is also something artificial regeneration can help you with. Different methods. One of them is direct seeding. In direct seeding, what you're doing is, first of all, you harvest and you prepare the site. So harvest and preparing is you go to the area, you cut down all of the trees, so that's the timber is harvested, and then you prepare the area. So you basically level the soil maybe, and then you till the soil. These and that you'll carry out these activities to aerate the soil and make it more accommodating for the seeds that you're gonna be um dispersing here. Then you acquire the seeds. Maybe you have certain trees of interest in your mind. Maybe you want to make a monoculture, you want to make a biculture, or you want to make a mixed plantation. You have certain trees in mind. You need to acquire the seeds of these trees. So either you want to get certain different genetics in that area. Maybe you want to try out some, better produce. Maybe you know that okay, this particular um, tree or this particular genes will give me better or bigger fruits, something like that. So you want to acquire the seeds of interest. You might want to carry out some treatment of the seeds. Maybe you want to crush the seed coat a bit so that the germination is faster, or you maybe want to treat the seeds with pesticides, or may make them disease resistant, something like that. So you will have to carry out certain treatment of the seeds so that they are better at regenerating in the area, they're better at germinating and avoiding all of the obstacles in the way. Then you're going to carry out sowing of the seeds, which can be either done by broadcast spreading, dibbling, or strip sowing or patch sowing. Broadcast spreading, as you can see in this image, basically you just have a lot of seeds and you spread them. Either you can use machines to do that, or you can do that manually. You can employ the villagers in that area and they can go around and spread the trees. You basically just throw the seeds onto the land. Dibbling is where you use this, you make these small, small holes and you put seeds in that area. This is a way of manual dibbling. This is sort of again manual, but it's a little bit more mechanized. So there are these particular nozzles which contain seeds, and then they will puncture the soil, create this hole, and drop the seed. Then as you move across, it will keep creating the holes and dropping the seeds in them. So that's dibbling. And strip and patch sowing is basically you either create strips of land and in those you put seeds. So you put the seeds not by like in a single pocket by like is happening in dibbling, but you create a strip of land and then you put the seeds in that strip. Or patch sowing is basically you create different patches which will mostly be bigger. So a strip will be a thin strip, a patch will be a broader patch of land, and then you throw strips seeds in that particular patch. So that's basically different methods of sowing seeds. Or you could actually go with planting saplings or seedlings. So you don't start at the seed, you start at the next stage, which is seedling or sapling, so that you've already taken care of the germination part of the process. So here again, you're going to have to select what species to grow and what kind of a seedling to grow. It could either be a bare root seedling, could be a containered seedling, or could be a vegetative propagule. So a bare root seedling would be a seedling in which you can see the roots and there's not a lot of soil around the roots, and you're going to go and plant that. Container seedling is like which comes in these pots, or you can see in these plastic bags like the nursery sell. So in the plastic bag, it will come with a certain amount of soil around the root, and then you basically take it out from the plastic bag, and along with the soil, you plant it into the land. So that's a container seedling. And vegetative propagule is basically growing a growing a tree from like the stem. So you basically have stem cuttings or something like that to grow. Again, you'll have to harvest and prepare the site as I discussed in the last slide. And here you will have to decide the spacing as well, because you're now putting in saplings. You will have to decide if you want to have like a uniform distribution. So at what space interval you want to put the saplings in, and then eventually you'll have to plant them. So first of all, you'll have to select what species you want to grow, what kind of seedlings you want to put. Then you have to harvest and prepare the site. You have to decide spacing of the saplings in which they are put, and then you have to plant. This is what a bare root seedling looks like. So basically the roots are bare, there's no particular earth connected next to it, no soil. Here you have soil in which the roots are embedded, so it's containerized. And then this is like a vegetative propagule. You cut off the stem and then you put the stem directly into the soil and it will grow into a new plant. This comes with its own advantages and disadvantages. Advantage is that you can control the plant density, you can control the species composition, you can control the genetic composition as well from the area. You can introduce improved seeds and seedlings. As I said, yeah, genetically better seeds and seedlings you can introduce. The management is low intensity. It creates even aged forests because the entirety is destroyed and now you're putting in seeds, so all of them will germinate at the same time. So it will be a uniformly structured, even aged forest, and the results are quicker. And the yield is better compared to natural regeneration. On natural regeneration, you're leaving things in the nature's hand, so you don't know how it's going to turn out. But here, you're actually putting in a lot of effort and doing things yourself, so you mostly will get quicker results with better yield. Disadvantages, it's very labor intensive. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of machinery involved. It's very costly because you are germinating them first, which again involves a lot of people. You have to pay these people. Then you germinate them, put them in these containers, take them up, you transport them to the area where you want to plant them. Then there somebody you will require to plant them itself. So all of that is required. The plants may not be adapted to the microhabitat because you're taking the seeds and the seedlings from somewhere else, from a different forest area. These may not be adapted to the microhabitat of this area, and this causes more disturbance to the soil and the area. So in general, if you think about the biodiversity, if you think about the fauna of the area, like the birds and the animals and the insects, they will also get a lot more disturbed by artificial regeneration. So this was all about the lectures today. Now we come up to the short quiz. So I hope, hopefully you guys will at least answer in the quiz, unlike the lecture. So first question is, tending is done during which stage of the life of the forest? Early stage, middle stage, late stage, or it can be carried out at any stage of life of the forest. So when is a stand tending carried out? Start typing your answers into the chat box. When is tending carried out for a forest stand? D. Anybody other people? What are your guesses or what are your answers? It doesn't have to be a guess, you might already know. Okay. So yes, Tharsha, you're correct. Basically, uh, it happens that any you can carry out tending at any stage of the life of the forest. Ring weeding. What is ring weeding? It's primarily a feature used for natural regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, artificial regeneration by direct sowing, or artificial regeneration by planting seedlings. When is ring weeding uh, done? What is it a feature of? Which of these practices involves ring weeding? You're saying artificial regeneration by planting seedlings. Other people, what are your answers? We just discussed this 5-10 minutes ago. When in which of these practices is ring weeding a part of? Natural regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, artificial with direct sowing, or while planting seedlings? Okay, so the answer is actually not artificial regeneration, it's assisted natural regeneration. So, naturally, when particular saplings are growing up, you basically mark off the areas in which they're growing up, you create a ring around them, and then you clear the weeds that can, what do you call it, that can compete with your growing sapling in the area. Which of these is the correct sequence of a silvicultural system? Tending, regeneration, harvesting, harvesting, tending, regeneration, tending, or regeneration, harvesting, and tending. Which of these is the sequence of silvicultural system? Harvesting, regeneration, and tending. Other people, today nobody is in the mood of giving answers, huh? Anyway, you're correct. It's basically harvesting, regeneration, and stand tending. We just discussed you first harvest the area, you take out all of the vegetation, then somehow you regenerate either naturally or artificially, and then you tend to that stand which you have just created. So that's the correct sequence. The movement of seeds away from their place of seed production into a new area is called translocation, migration, dispersal, or drifting. What is the movement of seeds called away from their place of seed production to a new location? Very good. That's called seed dispersal. It can either happen by natural abiotic agents, for example, wind, water. Um, so those kind of dispersals are abiotic dispersals, or can happen by biotic things. For example, birds and animals which feed onto the fruits and then disperse off the seeds via their droppings or feces. Tongia regeneration is natural regeneration. It's artificial regeneration with the help of villagers, artificial regeneration with nomadic tribes, artificial regeneration with hunters and gatherers. So, which of these is a Tongia regeneration? B. Very good. It's basically artificial regeneration, which involves the help of villagers. Yeah. Next is average age at which a tree is considered mature for felling is called what? Is it crop age, felling age, rotation age, or maturity age? We discussed it during the lecture. What is the average age at which a tree is considered mature for felling? C. Very good. It's basically the rotation age. Which of these is not an advantage of clear felling system? It's a simple system, easy and efficient operations. It allows for establishment of a more uniform crop. It increases soil erosion and landslides in hilly areas. It mimics natural processes of fire and large scale insect attacks. So, which of these is not an advantage of clear felling system? Yes, again, very good. Basically, clear felling can lead to an increase of soil erosion and landslides in hilly areas because you're clearing out the entire vegetation and the land is left fallow. There's nothing left but soil in that area. So it's a lot of loose soil without any trees to hold it together, bind it together. So it can lead to a lot of erosion and landslides. That's not an advantage. Which of these is not a feature of natural regeneration? Seed consumption by insects and seed feeders, little control over spacing and stand density, long time needed to regenerate the forest, or high requirement of heavy machinery and labor. Which of these is not a feature of natural regeneration? D. Very good. So you do not require any machinery or labor in natural regeneration because you're letting the forest regenerate on its own. Okay, one site was clear cut. Which of these methods of regeneration cannot be used in a short time frame? Natural regeneration, artificial regeneration by direct sowing, by planting seedlings, or by transplanting trees? Which of these cannot be used in a short time frame? Yes, natural vegetation cannot be used. Natural vegetation itself is a very long time consuming process, and anyway, after a site is clear cut, you cannot use natural regeneration anyway. Which of these is not a feature of natural regeneration? Low cost, less requirement of machinery and labor, preservation of genetic variability, good control over genetic improvement. Which of these is again not a feature of natural regeneration? Very good. So you cannot exercise genetic control or improvement in the area because you basically, again, let the local trees themselves be the seed banks. So you're not inputting or bringing in any new seeds to allow for genetic variation. Clear felling is most suitable for species that require very heavy shade to grow, that can regenerate well in full sunlight, that grow only under mature trees, or that cannot tolerate open conditions. So, which of these is most suitable? So, clear felling is most suitable for which of these species? Very nice. Clear felling is most suitable for species that can generate in full sunlight because you've entirely cleared the big trees. The canopy is gone. There's a lot of sunlight in the area. So you need to have species which can generate in full sunlight. Assisted natural regeneration involves completely planting a new forest, allowing natural regeneration but helping it by protection or thinning, removing all vegetation before planting, or only irrigating plantations. So, assisted natural regeneration is involves what of these? Yes. So, it basically allows for natural regeneration, but it helps it by protection and thinning. Artificial regeneration refers to regeneration without human involvement, regeneration using planting or direct seeding by humans, natural sprouting from stumps, or regeneration caused by forest fires. So, which of these refers to artificial regeneration? This you all would know by now. Yeah, it's basically regeneration where humans' involvement is completely required for planting of or direct seeding. Which of the following is a method of artificial regeneration? Coppicing, plant nursery related seedling,
Mm,
natural seed fall, or root suckering. So correct, basically planting nursery raised seedlings. So if you're planting nursery raised seedlings, that's the only artificial regeneration. Coppicing and root suckering, as we discussed, is vegetative propagation, and natural seed fall is the seeds that come out of mature trees and then spread into the area and then establish into large trees. That is natural regeneration. A silvicultural system refers to a method used only for planting trees, planned method of managing forest stands for regeneration and growth, technique used to harvest timber, or a method for measuring tree height. So, which of these is silvicultural system required for? Yes, again the answer is B. It's basically a way of managing forest stands for regeneration and their growth. Thank you so much, guys, for joining today's lecture. We are done with today's quiz also. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. I'll be here. If, yeah. Otherwise, you can exit the meeting. We're done with today's class. Thank you so much for joining. If anybody has any doubts, you can ask me. Otherwise, you can leave the meeting.